I'm Sean, this is a McLaren 720S Spider, and this is a downpipe. I bet you can tell where this is headed. Some downpipes, you may have to get a tune. This is one of those cases. So I've already taken it out. It goes right here. If you want to see how to do that, click on the video that pops up here. They'll show you the whole video on how to take the ECU out for a tune. Beyond that, we've got to start with the wheel well liner. And that we had to take out to do the ECU. We will also do it on the other side, and then we get into the real fun stuff. As I said, you may not have to do a tune for your downpipes. It's going to depend on the downpipes that you get. These in particular, you do. And they might be labeled as offered use only, or they may be slightly modified from stock, or they might have different cats in them, and if they do have different cats from OEM, you will not have to tune. But in this case we do, so we've already done that. These install connection-wise pretty easily. This end is going to go at the top. There's a V-band clamp, I'll cover that. At the bottom on the turbo side, 4 bolts. It only goes in there one way, so everything will actually line up perfectly if you have any of that in there. We'll go over that as well. But in terms of how these actually really fit in there, they just do. One thing that is common between sides is this pipe that you have to take loose. There are 8mm bolts, 3 of those. There are also 7mm clamps. One up here right above the accumulator, one down here at the inlet pipe. You have to take this whole thing out before you can get access to the O2 sensors. You do want to get these O2 sensors loose before you unbolt anything. If you're smart, you will have already had the bolts soaking, so they will come loose a little easier. If you have not already placed your inlet pipes, now is a fantastic time to do that. You should probably do that. You can get those from my website. There are 2 O2 sensors. One is right here, one is right back there. You have to unplug this right here that goes follow the line. This one, follow the line, and you will need one of these or similar to take the O2 sensor out. If you're lucky, you didn't fly across the country and forget one and have to go buy one. I am not lucky. We've got the O2 sensors out, and that means we can now take everything loose. Now you can start at the top or you can start at the bottom, but you're gonna get the same result. Doesn't really matter. I'm gonna start at the bottom because I'm already here and the lift is up. So all of these are 13mm nuts that are on here. You can reuse them, not a bad practice to replace them, but they are reusable. So the 4 13mm, you might take a little bit of effort by hand to do that. Don't use a tool because you want to be able to feel what those are doing. And by that, I mean, you know how I said if it feels like it's really tight and it starts twisting or anything, you want to make sure that it's maybe a little bit difficult to kind of get that first breakaway, and then it should start spinning off pretty easily. If it is not doing that, you're probably going to break it. So just keep an eye on that, do it by hand, get a feel for it, you'll thank yourself later. I'll also say that if you happen to have one of these guys, after you break it loose and you're satisfied that it's going to keep spinning that way, by all means, use one of these to spin it the rest of the way off. You'll probably not be cursing for a little while with those tiny ass turns because you don't have a lot of room to move. So if you got one, use it, but only after you've broken it loose. Now I've got all 4 bolts out, and before I get too far on top, you see that alternator and how that alternator has an active post there? We're gonna wanna not have that in contact with the downpipe. So what we are going to do is we're gonna take a rag and we're gonna cover that up. You just have to lay it across it. You can also just disconnect the battery. That's another way. But if you don't want to disconnect the battery, you can just put a cloth over that. Just make sure it definitely covers the whole thing. Stuff that in there, and then we can make sure that we don't ground that out when you're pulling it out. Now another thing, these 2 bolts. We're gonna take these out because this, we're gonna need to wiggle here in a little bit, but we gotta disconnect it up top first before we get to that. Up top now, we have got to get access to all of this stuff. So the way that we're going to do that, this piece on the spider, you've got screws here, they just kind of turn loose and unlock. We've got 2 more at the top, up here, and on the other side. On the coupe, it is a little bit different. You obviously don't have to open the top, which you can do by your door controls, by the way. So on the coupe, you've got the panel up here where it'll just kind of pull up, and you've got the screws down here. That's where those would be different on the coupe. On the spider, to get these pieces out, like I said, those 4 screws, this will lift up, and there's little tabs that are right there that slide under it. So you want to pull up carefully, and then out this way, and up a little bit on both sides. And that's how you will get these off. Then these will pop right out as long as you have those 4 screws out. Now with this panel off, we've got stuff on the top side. Now that bolt is missing. It's not uncommon to see those missing from the factory. This side has it, that side doesn't. I see it missing a lot. This nut right there on that clamp is an 11 millimeter. And you notice that's a really long bolt. And you're not getting a socket in there. So let me show you how we solve that. I've got this handy dandy tool. It is ratcheting, it has a flex head, and it will go right in there, and it will turn it. You should probably get one of those. It will make your life a whole lot easier. Now you've still got the problem that you need to get that V-band clamp out of there. So for that, I've got one of these for a good old-fashioned beat off. You can kind of get it in there, smack it, flip it, rub it down. Oh no, you can usually break that loose and get that clamp not completely out, but you do want to get it loose, and it can hang out there if it needs to. Now normally when I do this job, I take off a bunch of other stuff. All this stuff, heat shields, all that, I take all that off. Now, I'm going to try something that I've never done before. See those 8mm bolts down there that hold that bracket on? I'm going to try taking those out, taking that bracket out to give me a little bit of wiggle room. And then I'm going to try to wiggle it from the bottom since I got that clamp loose, and that should get the whole thing out. And I might, maybe, just be able to pop it loose and then pull it out, because it actually comes out through the fender well. We're going to see if I have to take all that stuff apart. I might have to take it apart, or I might only have to do it on one side. I've done this several times, so we're trying to find a shortcut. Now I was able to use my pry tool and get there behind the bolt from this side and pry it out. Be aware of that gasket there, but I pried that out and got it to where it went past the studs. Now you might notice I did take this loose, 8mm bolts, because that's going to kind of be in the way of pulling that out. So I'm going to try to wiggle this around and see if the top will come loose without having to bring this back down and get the clamp completely off. I did loosen it up, I knocked it up, but I didn't get it completely off the flange. Figure I'll wiggle this and it'll probably get it loose there. We'll give that a shot. May have to bring it down and move it around from the top. So I confirmed 2 things just now. One, the clamp was still kind of holding on for dear life. Even though you kind of got it broken loose, if it's not wiggling around, it is definitely going to be grabbing. So it's got to be just flopping around there. I broke that loose, and then I did pull it out without taking any of those heat shields off. And that's good news, because it's kind of tedious to do all that little stuff. And you got to remember where all the bolts are. There's a few different lengths, and maybe if you miss one, maybe it rattles or anything. But we do not have to take those heat shields off. So life hack for me in the future, it came right out. To give you a better visual, this is that V-band clamp. It did come all the way out, and you want to make sure that it goes back in there before you get too far along. Now we can actually move that around a little bit. I did start the nuts just enough to kind of hold the place down there, but up here you still got to move it around to get this clamp back on. Now when I say that it was sticking, you see there's 3 sections. This bottom section is what was really holding it in there. You may have to take a pry tool or a screwdriver or something like that to get in there. Just kind of knock it down. As soon as you break it loose a little bit, it does come right off. When you go to put this back in, it's going to be kind of similar. It's going to be possibly a little bit hard to get back in there. You do have to make sure you get this lined up perfectly. If you don't get that lined up perfectly, it just will refuse to go in on an angle. So if you have to lubricate this to make sure that this joint will actually flex, do that. Silicone spray or something like that will work. Make sure you don't use anything that is flammable unless it is completely evaporated. But I think doing something not flammable is the better idea. So we're going to make sure we can move this around just a little bit to make sure that lines up to push it all the way through. Again, when you go to put this in, you might need a second set of hands, or you might be able to kind of one-hand it and get it in there. But you got to make sure that thing can slide. Yeah, we want it to slide easier than that. So I'll have to do that before I go to put it back in. Now, because I lubricated that, I was able to use one hand to pull the clamp like this to get the stud to come through, and then use my right hand to put the nut on. So you're kind of doing some weird stuff to get in there, but that keeps you from having to take all this stuff loose. But I did get it in there. Make sure it actually is all the way around on both sides. And then you can tighten that guy up. As long as you got it on there snug, you could probably do the top or bottom and be okay. But make sure that that's snug up here so it doesn't pop off while you go do the bottom ones. Now I got everything secure up top, including that bracket that we took loose, if you recall. One thing that does help, if you have a magnetic socket. Yeah, 8mm magnetic. Holds the bolt in place, drop it straight in, start threading it. Wonderful thing. Get one. So we're going to put these guys back in. I am going to use that right angle electric ratchet because mine will do 40 foot-pounds. I do not recall what the torque spec is on that. I could probably look it up, but it really doesn't matter. You need it pretty snug, but if you try too much, it's a brass bolt. It's going to break. So 40 foot-pounds has been pretty good for me. That's what my tool will do, so I'm going to put them in with that. Double check it by hand and make sure it feels good and it's snug. Make sure nothing's bound up. Also, make sure you get that gasket in there if it fell out. Mine stayed on the turbo, so I didn't have to deal with that, but make sure that gasket stays in place and try not to mangle it up too much. Now let's talk O2 sensors. You got to put them back in. One is upstream, one is downstream. Upstream is going to be the one that is closest the turbo. Downstream is the one further back. Depending which side of the car you're on, I couldn't really tell you position. Front of the car, back of the car. So you probably sat them down and you don't know which one is which. Good news! The one with the slightly longer length of cable is the downstream. But if you can't figure that out, the plugs are different. The plug is nearest where it goes in. If you have them backwards, things are not going to operate correctly. So you'll have to go back and swap them. They will physically go in the same way, but the plugs are the way that you can tell which one is front and back. So we're gonna pop those back in, get those reconnected, and then I'll tell you a little bit about the other side that is mostly the same but slightly different. Now, a note on installing these O2 sensors. You do need the tool to snug them back up. You only need to snug them. You don't have to mega wrench on them. Just keep turning it until all of a sudden it goes, yeah, that's enough. They will tighten up. They will stay in there. It's fine. So just lightly get them snugged up. Not a ton on it. You're good to go. Make sure you plug them in and you're good to go. I went ahead and assembled everything on this other side back short of the fender liner because I still got to put that back in for the ECU when that comes back from M Engineering. Normally, I would do everything you have to do on the bottom at one time and everything on the top at one time. So you're not up, down, up, down, up, down, especially if you're doing it on jack stands, which I have done before. But I did that for the purpose of this video so I can kind of show you one all the way through. Now I am going to show you what's different on the other side because it's basically the same. I don't need to show you all that except for what is actually different. We do have enough room up top to where you don't have to remove the heat shield. I know because I've done it before without removing the heat shield. But here's what's different. These hoses right here. Now on the other side, these hoses are different. Obviously on the other side we have the canister, and you don't want to move those around too much because they could start leaking and get damaged. Otherwise, these kind of go the same thing. These are clipped up. These are on soft lines. You can move them around. They do bend just a little bit. They don't bend a lot. So don't force this too much. But more than likely, you are going to have this in contact with this. It is going to rub it. Don't worry about it too much, but be aware of what is bending and how much. So we've got to take these nuts out, same as before. I already took the O2 sensors out. But once we get this loose and then loose up top using the same method as before, when this comes out, it'll come out this way. We do have a little bit more room up top. And by more room up top, I mean it's spaced a little differently. It's not right directly on top. I'll show you. Now up here, we actually do have some additional room. On this side, we're butted right up against that heat shield. On this side, we're not. So we've got a little bit more room to play there. Again, there's your little visual. So we don't have to worry about that so much, but we do still have to get the same stuff loose. It is still kind of awkward, but there's that. Another thing, because sometimes people do dumb things, observational, so you don't do dumb things. This is a soft line. This is a soft line. This downpipe has sharp edges. Be aware if you're dragging that edge across the hose. Just kind of look, make sure you're not, sawing through it. And additionally, there's a brake line right here. So if you didn't notice, maybe you go a little hard or whatever, might damage that. So just make sure you're aware that exists. You are going to have to kind of twist it and contort it and move it around, and you might have to, these flanges, when they get caught here, you might have to rotate it just a little bit. Kind of, it does come out, I promise. I just did it. So now you've got both downpipes in, you've got the V-band clamps up top snugged, you've got everything good to go. So the next step is put it all back together. Now, I said I'm not gonna put this liner back in because I've still got the ECU to put back in. But if you leave the other side out, you can put the diffuser back on a little bit easier. There's also a little trick to putting the diffuser on. Same way you took it off, hold it up there. Having a second hand doesn't hurt. But if you put one in there, the whole thing will stay up. Now, the reason that you would leave the liner out, which I didn't because I put it back in when I forgot, it's easier to get it all lined up in here. You don't have to fool with getting it behind here. You still can. It's just a little easier if you don't. So once you get that kind of up there, like I said, put one here, one here. Either way, that will hold it all in place. What I do recommend doing first, however, is these. Put these in before you get these. It's a little easier to get these adjusted in. You might also notice they're kind of diagonal. So when you go to put them in, you might feel like you want to put them in this way. You'll just cross thread it. Don't do that. Start it by hand. Find the right angle. Spin it a little bit. Do that for all of them. Never just go straight to a power tool. Put it in by hand. You'll kind of find the right angle. It'll spin really easy and then go in. But you do watch out for that angle on these. That does make a difference. And now for some putting back together tips. You've got to put this piece back in there first. And just like it came out, it's going to go up there like that. Now all these screws, if you recall, you barely turn them and they go in. If you don't have them in the right spot, they're not going to tighten up at all. It does kind of help if you get the ones up there first, and then the back one should line up and go right in. Those times they can be a little bit picky side to side a little bit. So if you get those up there in first, you're better off. You remember these panels and how they had the little tabs here? Yeah, you got to slide those under first. So those go under there like so. And when you get it in the right spot, they click right in. Same thing happens on the other side. And once you've got the car back together, you should be able to just fire it up and enjoy. I would normally put the ECU back in and fire it up and show you, except for icy weather has prevented us from doing that. The AM delivery is now at some point today delivery, and I also have to go to the airport and leave. So you're not going to hear it in this video, even though you wanted to, but blame UPS, not me. When you go to put the wheels back on, 96 foot-pounds. Don't use an impact to just 96 foot-pounds. You're good to go. You should know that from other videos. So I hope you like watching this one. There'll be some more this year, actually. So hit the old subscribe button, hit the thumbs up, comment on here anything other than let's hear it, because obviously you're not. See you in the next one.